If the Supreme Court rules against all of your challenges, will you then respect the will of the people and work to ensure the implementation of this law?
If I'm unsuccessful and this is the law of the state of Nebraska and we've exhausted those remedies, I am the chief law enforcement of the state. No matter whether I like the actual underlying policy or not, it's my obligation to do it. And absolutely, it will be my responsibility, and we will absolutely do that.
Educate, inform, inspire. The Dan Parsons Show, a podcast that lifts up instead of tearing down.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Dan Parsons Show. I am your host, Dan Parsons. As the Nebraska legislature winds down its 90-day session, one of the biggest issues left to tackle is medical marijuana. We've been covering the issue for some time now, and I know there's a ton of interest from our audience. So today, we're talking with Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilgers about his opposition to the compromise bill that was voted out of committee earlier this month. Here's my conversation with Attorney General Hilgers. Make sure to leave a comment on our YouTube page. I'm sure you'll have a few. Enjoy. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome for his inaugural visit to the Dan Parsons Show, Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilgers. General Hilgers, welcome.
Dan, it is great to be on. Inaugural and hopefully first of many.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Hey, before I get started, just on the record, we've been working behind the scenes, but I just wanted to acknowledge Suzanne Gage, your comms director, in helping set up this interview. And Suzanne and I go back years, and we've known each other a long time. And in fact, we were reminiscing that back when I was just a punk kid, I held the same job with Attorney General Don Stenberg.
No kidding. I didn't know that. Well, relationships matter more in this game than, as you know, to get anything done in the world. And Suzanne is a great teammate in our office. And my first political memory was seeing her mom when President Reagan came in the 80s. So yeah, absolutely. We are big Suzanne Gage fan club here today.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thanks,
well, as I've told you in the pregame, on May 1st, a legislative bill designed to help implement medical cannabis in Nebraska narrowly advanced from committee. LB 677, State Senator Ben Hansen, advanced 5-3 from General Affairs. It would set up a state regulatory process for medical cannabis system that voters overwhelmingly approved back in November. You've come out in opposition to that compromise bill. So I guess maybe my first question, General Hilgers, is why are you opposed to medical marijuana in Nebraska?
Yeah, it's a great question. And by the way, Dan, before we get started, thank you for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think getting people together who might hold different viewpoints on this particular issue, like any other, I think is critical. So I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with your listeners and your viewers and have a good dialogue on this particular topic. So there's multiple parts of your question. I have reasons for opposing medical marijuana in the first instance, which we can get into. But as you stated, the two bills did pass under in November from the voters. And really, there's two key objections that I'm pushing on today, which is not necessarily a policy about medical marijuana as a policy. As you know, or if you've seen my comments in the past, I've opposed that for a lot of reasons, one of which is I do not think it's constitutional. Really, there's two sort of vectors that I'm focusing on. Number one is the bill itself. So AM 1251 to LB 677. I have very specific grounded objections to it. And then the second thing, which we could spend some time if you'd like, is just the petition process itself. A lot of people ask, well, Mike, why are you fighting that particular case? Why are you fighting in court? Why are you fighting in front of the Nebraska Supreme Court? So I'll address maybe the first one, which is my opposition to AM 1251. And that is based on my reading of the bill. So it's 124 pages. There's a lot in there. And I don't expect most people to have read that particular bill. I've read it. I've actually read it, Dan, probably more times than I can count. And I think my takeaway from that bill is that despite the characterization as sort of a medical marijuana regulatory bill, I actually think it goes far beyond that. I actually think it supercharges something that voters did not vote on, which was recreational marijuana. You know, there's been questions in the past whether there should be a limited medicinal bill versus recreational. I think we can all agree the voters did not vote on recreational marijuana. My view is that this bill actually does that. I also think this bill does quite a few other things that are harmful to Nebraskans, that I don't think Nebraskans voted on. I think it supercharges, as an example, the black market. I think it makes people less safe with their health providers. I can give you all the details on all this, but I'm just giving you a top line. And I think among other things, it restricts responsible parties from trying to regulate this. So in my view, it goes far beyond medicinal marijuana, and in its particulars, I think is not good for Nebraska.
Well, and so thank you for that answer. That's a great overview. So the ballot initiative is self-executing. In fact, state officials said during the bill's hearing that current law that was adopted by voters allows for home growing and essentially anyone to get a distribution permit. So if you're against the widespread use and distribution, why are you against Senator Hansen's bill that arguably is far more restrictive than the initiative?
Well, I would argue that it's far less restrictive. But you raise, and let me address why. But you raise a really good point, and I've said this actually from the beginning. I am fighting the petition, as you know, Dan, but there has not been an injunction on the petitions, and so they are the law. And as one of the two bills that were passed by the people, one of them was literally titled the Medical Cannabis Regulatory Act, which contained within it a regulatory system that the people voted on. And so I think my view at the beginning is to say, let's let the regulatory system that the people voted on play itself out. But here, let me just give you a couple of specific, for instances, as to why I think this is less restrictive than what the people voted on. Number one, it does have this list, and I think maybe supporters of the bill would say, well, Mike, it has this list of reasons for why you can get medicinal marijuana. That's not included in the petition itself. As you know, there was chronic pain as one, serious medical conditions. And I would actually say that the way that list works individually in combination with other provisions basically eliminates all restrictions whatsoever on the purchase of medical marijuana. And I'll tell you why. There's two reasons. Number one, there's a couple reasons that you can get medicinal marijuana that are very broad and vague, like serious medical condition, chronic pain. But the bigger reason, Dan, is that there's an immunity provision for health providers who provide these marijuana recommendations that make it literally impossible for civil or other authorities to be able to hold them accountable for violations of their licensures, which, in my view, renders all of the things within those conditions totally advisory because there's no one that we can hold accountable. It also authorizes, which is not in the particular act itself, the ability of out-of-state medical providers to be able to provide these particular recommendations. So I actually think in many ways it's less restrictive than the bill passed by the voters. I'll give you just a couple of examples, if I might. It actually provides some significant immunities to those who operate within sort of this industry. So as an example, the registered caretaker, which does exist under the bill, has no limits on what they can carry. So quite literally, you could have 30, 40, 50 pounds. But then also the bill provides an immunity provision for those within the vicinity of the registered caretaker, which means, as an example, that if you have a registered caretaker, and I-80 is maybe one of the most prolific pipelines for illicit drugs in the United States. If you could literally have a caretaker go to the I-80 border, the border where I-80 intersects with Wyoming, get in the car with someone else, essentially be a drug mule across I-80. That also was not included in the original bill. So there's kind of example after example after example after example I could give you, including restricting the rights of the cities, handcuffing law enforcement. There's a lot more examples I could give you, but that's why at bottom, 124 pages, it is far less restrictive than the medicinal bill passed by the voters, in my view.
So I've heard you talk before about the federal concern, about federal regulations. And one of your main arguments, the effort to legalize medical marijuana being illegal under federal law. So I guess I've had a lot of people ask me, why aren't you making that argument in federal court litigation?
That's a great question. And by the way, where I try to reach common ground, there's a lot of people, and you know this, Dan, people very passionate about this issue. And there are a lot of people who are not happy with the types of things that I'm doing. I understand that. Where I try to reach some common ground where I can is to say, where I hope most of us can agree, is that the federal government has failed us. They have failed us in this particular issue. The federal government has made marijuana a Schedule I drug, which means it can't be sold anywhere. Now, the federal government either has to follow its statutes or not or change the statute. But what it can't do is not follow those statutes. And that's where it's allowed these other states to pop up, because it said, well, we're just not going to enforce the law. In my view, as Attorney General in particular, but as a lawyer and just a citizen, I don't think that should be the case. Having set that aside, I do believe that Schedule 1 makes it unlawful because it's a Schedule 1 drug and the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. We can't authorize sale in Nebraska. The reason we haven't sued yet, and we're going to, I mean, we will, Dan, I just want your listeners to understand that we will, is because that suit is not yet right. It's not until you actually have the license that can get issued for the sale. You're just not quite ready yet. So we will, but we haven't yet because it's just not the time legally to be able to bring that suit.
Yeah, and I appreciate adhering to the rule of law. I think there's not been enough of that, frankly, in recent days. But there aren't any other instances, are there, of federal officials stepping in and stopping a state medical marijuana program that I'm aware of?
I am not aware. I'm not aware of it. No, I think you're right. I think in recent history, at least. I mean, well, let me take a step back. I think there have been. You'd have to go back 20 years. So there's the Gonzales-Rake decision back in the early 2000s. Bush 43 era case from the Nebraska or the United States Supreme Court, where actually this whole issue of preemption went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. So I'd say 20 years ago that happened. I would say right around President Obama's era with his Department of Justice, they started making more of these decisions not to enforce it. I think since then, Dan, you have seen exactly what you just said. You have seen in some cases, though, other states in particular file suit on portions of this preemption question, and there have been some success with some of those particular cases. But you're right. For the most part, the federal government hasn't, in my view, done the job that they should do, which is either enforce the law or change it.
Related question, I guess. If the Supreme Court rules against all of your challenges, both current and whatever may be coming, will you then respect the will of the people and work to ensure the implementation of this law? If
the Supreme Court and our challenges, if I'm unsuccessful and this is the law of the state of Nebraska and we've exhausted those remedies, absolutely. I am the chief law enforcement of the state. It is my obligation, no matter whether I like the actual underlying policy or not. As you know, Dan, it's my obligation to do it, and absolutely, it will be my responsibility, and we will absolutely do that. And by the way, to the extent that this law is in effect today, as an example, and we have had challenges, but they are not enjoined, we're going to do what we can within our ethical duties to actually ensure that the law is effectuated. So if that means under certain circumstances giving some legal advice to the Medical Cannabis Commission, that's what we'll do. So I will follow the law, but we would like to see some of these challenges play out so we know what the law is.
You know, I appreciate these good, tough questions, Mike. Appreciate it very much. And you're willing to talk and be transparent about this issue. So this isn't the only issue that voters through the ballot initiative process passed, and then the legislative process then has gummed that up. Some have suggested that your legal and political tax on citizen initiatives then chills the people's right to petition their government when their government fails to act. And when you undermine the will of the people, it contributes to voter apathy, because people just throw up their hands and get the message that their vote doesn't matter. So what do you say to those people that this effort is not healthy for our democracy?
Oh, it's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. Let me address the two pieces of your question. First is on the legislative side. And I never had an instance where the people passed a statute that I can remember when I was in the legislature, speaker or otherwise, where we modified that statute. There was an instance, though, when the people passed a constitutional amendment for gambling, and the scope of that amendment said, legislature, go figure it out. And I opposed it. I'll tell you and your listeners that I voted no on those ballot petitions, but I felt that it was my responsibility as speaker to uphold the people's will. And so I do think in those constitutional circumstances where the legislature is mandated, the legislature's done its duty to do what the people want. And also in terms of the legislature, the Constitution does allow the legislature to make some amendments. If it didn't, it wouldn't have the provision. It has a provision that says you can modify it if you have 33 or more votes on final reading. So the Constitution does contemplate the legislature being the policy body that it is and maybe making some revisions to the people. I can't speak to the ones. I know there's been criticisms of the legislative process this year on those. I can't speak to those. Let me address your question about my actions in the litigation. And what I would tell people is actually, in fact, what we are doing is ensuring the integrity of the process. And the reason is because everyone has to have confidence, in my view, whether you agree with this particular issue or not, Dan, that the petition process, the end result of which is to pass laws that bind you and me and everyone else who's listening to this in the state of Nebraska, that bind us with the power of potentially criminal punishment if we violate. And the legislature is open. We can see when the legislature makes laws, we can see who's there, how they vote, there's accountability. The petition process is less so. And it is critically important that the people who provide those execute the petition process follow the law. And there are a lot of laws. There's valid signatures. You have to have valid circulator oaths. You have to have notaries who do the right thing. And I would say, for people listening to this, this is the only petition, and there were other petitions that I didn't vote for. And none of those petitions had any issues. There were no investigations. There were no inquiries. There was no allegation of wrongdoing. This was a petition that was an outlier. And we had a lead from the Hall County election commissioner who ultimately found information that ultimately led to a criminal conviction that sparked an investigation that we found more wrongdoing as we sort of peeled behind the layers. And the way that I tell people is say, look, if I'm the referee and there's a 55-yard field goal, 60-yard field goal, and they kick it, they win the game with 2 seconds left. I'm the referee and I see someone on the left side of the line jump or there's a hold. I have to follow the law there, and I have to call that penalty, even if it's an amazing kick and the crowd's wild and it's like this amazing, Cinderella story for the victory of the underdog, whatever it might be. I have to follow the law because there's going to be more games down the road. And if we can't have faith that our election officials are actually going to apply the law the way that it should be, then that's a real problem. And the example I would give you is for all your listeners who think about this particular issue and they're like, golly, 70-30, Mike, what are you doing? I would ask them to put themselves in the shoes of another future petition where maybe it's something they really don't like. Let's say there's a petition where someone wants to ensure that boys don't go into girls' bathrooms. That's a very big hot button issue. That's very passionate on both sides. And let's say that passes 70-30. And let's say though that the people who did that particular petition process didn't follow the rules. People need to have confidence that every aspect of the process is being followed the right way. And the only way that they can is when the regulators, the people charged with holding people accountable and reviewing what they believe to be misconduct, actually act. And that's all that we did here in this instance.
To date, and remind our listeners and viewers where we're at with litigation, but to date, there hasn't been a court say that there's been enough evidence to overturn what the people did, right? There hasn't been proved any malfeasance of signatures that made a difference in this process. So
yes, the last qualifier I think was critical. The trial court did actually find that there was malfeasance. So that's not what you said. You had a qualifier, which I think was important. There's no doubt that the trial court, even where we lost, the court didn't take it off the ballot. We did lose at the trial court level, but the trial court did find that certain things were not followed. They did find that, for instance, notaries who are public officials didn't follow the proper laws when it comes to notarizing people, as an example. I'd encourage anyone on this who's really interested to read our brief in front of the Nebraska Supreme Court. They can find it on our website, ago.nebraska.gov, that sort of walks through the question of law that we're going to present to the Nebraska Supreme Court. So we think the factual findings are there such that they didn't come under the signatures, but that's what the process is for. We absolutely lost to the trial court. But my obligation to Nebraskans is to make sure I'm pursuing the truth and trying to actually go all the way through. So we're going in front of the Supreme Court. And if we lose that, Dan, we'll accept their judgment. Yeah. But by the way, we appealed another case in Hall County the way we lost at the trial court, and we won that one. So the process has all the different layers, and we just want to see it all the way through.
One of the other concerns I know about patients and others about this issue is under current law, or if Senator Hansen's bill is adopted, will you pledge that you would not prosecute individual doctors or patients who are following the law, even if you disagree with that law?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'd be hesitant I don't know if I could say yes or no, and here's why. And let me explain sort of the backdrop of this. So my office, we are the primary enforcer of the health licensure rules in the state of Nebraska, which means we have great medical professionals. We have great doctors, great nurses. In general, we are not going out and prosecuting them. We're not, in general, going out and trying to take their licenses. But there are instances, Dan, in which someone did something wrong. Maybe they stole the drugs, opiates from their patients. Maybe they operated drunk. I mean, these are all real-life examples, by the way. And we have to be able to pursue those license revocations and potentially prosecution where needed. I can't make a blanket statement in the marijuana context because what if someone's got a mental health issue, they're suicidal, they're given marijuana, they shouldn't have, they hurt somebody. I can't make that kind of a blanket statement.
Yeah. What have I missed on this topic, General, that you'd like to, I think this is a great overview. Again, I appreciate you coming on here and talking about the issue, but I don't want to leave anything off the table.
No, I appreciate that, Dan. Nothing specifically. I would just say, I would again express my gratitude to you. I know you're very passionate about this. I know there's a lot of Lincolnites and Nebraskans who are very passionate about this issue. And I understand there's going to be people, no matter what I say, or no matter the dialogue that we have, who are still going to disagree and maybe vehemently disagree with what it is that we're doing. And my only hope is to try to convey some understanding as to the why. And then it's grounded not in politics, because, by the way, politics on the 70-30 issue, you're not a very good politician if you're picking the 30 too often. It's not on politics, but we're trying to follow the law, as I swore to Nebraskans that I would. And so I'd encourage people to reach out. They can go on our website. There's more information. I will tell you, I've had great conversations with Senator Hansen and some of the proponents of that bill, and I just think we were better off. And in the city of Lincoln in particular, Dan, I think one of our greatest presidents who did such a good job to listen to so many different people. I just think this is a great opportunity for us. Maybe not to come around and agree. We're not all going to sing kumbaya and say, gosh, golly, Mike, you're right. We're not going to fight you on this or call you out for things you're not doing right. But hopefully through these kind of conversations and dialogue, we can at least have a little bit better mutual understanding. And I think that's all I'm trying to accomplish. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, Dan.
Yeah. So what else is going on in the Attorney General's office? What's keeping you busy other than these issues?
Oh, wow. There's quite a bit going on. We do quite a lot of different things. Our consumer protection group is led by BB Sternad, who's a superstar. We're very proud of the talent we've recruited, both homegrown and then out of state. We've gone and plucked some real superstars around the country and recruited them right here to Lincoln so they can raise their families. She's doing amazing things. We've got a major suit against TikTok for all the harm that they're doing to young people. That's in Lincoln right now. We've got a major antitrust suit in Lincoln County against the 4 trucking manufacturers of semi-trucks in the country who are trying to use their own collusive monopoly to stop the sale of diesel-based trucks. So our consumer team is really busy. One big thing that I'm trying to do is actually grow our office out west. We're one Nebraska. That includes Lincoln, includes Omaha, and includes our friends all the way out to Sydney and everyone in between. So we have an office out there. We just recruited our first lawyer out there. So we've got quite a few different things going on. My goal, Dan, was to build as good of a team as I could. Not going to win every battle, but are going to lead with integrity, work their tails off, and pick the right fights for Nebraskans and win their fair share. That's what we're trying to do every day.
Yeah. Well, Attorney General Mike Hilgers, appreciate your time, appreciate your patience, and we had some technical things at the beginning of this, so and not your fault. Anyway, we figured all that out, and we're across the finish line. So, you come back anytime you want.
I appreciate that, Dan. This is a great conversation. Thank you for the invitation.
You bet. Well, thank you, Attorney General Hilgers, for that candid conversation. I really appreciate it. Thanks to the team behind the scenes who make this show possible. Chase Porter, executive producer. Ike Samanis, producer and graphic design. Panology Tech Solutions, technical help and equipment. And Kim Remington, Parsons PR's director of operations. But most importantly, thanks to each of you for tuning in. Don't forget to hop on over to the YouTube page and hit the subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. Okay, that's the show. Thanks for tuning in. Now go do good things. I'm Dan Parsons.